Today, we are walking through part of our vision called Serve the Family. And when I was told that I was supposed to talk on serving the family, I got kind of, not confused, but I didn't really know where to take it. And the reason is because all of us have family, but not all of us have the same family. Some of us have very traditional families, some have very modern families. Some are nuclear, some are extended, some are blended, some are broken. Some have missing family members, some have walked through adoption, which carries its own ups and downs. And so trying to navigate how we were going to talk about serving each and every family, I got kind of flabbergasted. That's a fun word. We'll stick with flabbergasted. And I was trying to figure out, God, what do you want me to tell this family about how to serve their families? And so I was reading up a lot of things on family ministry and on the family and how people have taught on it. And there's about 5 main verses or passages in the New Testament that talk about family. And they're going to come up on the screen in about 0.8 seconds. It looks perfect. And so we are not going to talk about any of these scriptures today. These are all of your New Testament passages on like the role of the husband, of the wife, of the parents, of the children, of the slave, and of the master. We're not covering any of it. But the reason why I put them up here is because they are very important. And they're very important because they show the role that each person and your relationship to people play in family. And so the reason why we're not going to talk about these is because if you don't understand the passage that we're going to talk about, then none of these make sense. And it's impossible for us to really understand biblical service without first understanding this passage that we're going to talk about, which is talking about love. And so we are going to be in 1 John 4, 9 through 12. I didn't put it on the program because I wanted it to be a surprise. And I wanted us to talk through this first. So 1 John chapter 4, 9 through 12. If you don't know where 1 John is, it's 5th from the back. So it's easier just to pull open the back, roll through your index, Revelation, Jude, 3rd, 2nd, 1 John. And so I always like to say kind of where the book is, because when I was growing up and I was in high school, I always got super embarrassed because I didn't have the Bible memorized as a 16-year-old. Shocker. And so I always felt really embarrassed by it. So this is where it is. Don't be scared to use that table of contents. It's right there. It works wonders because it tells you right where it is. So we're going to be in 1 John chapter 4, 9 through 12, and we're going to talk about how to live in a grace-filled family. How to live in a grace-filled family. I'm going to have, just so you know, I'm going to kind of roll through the schedule. So if you're going to like check out during certain parts, you'll know when your favorite is and when to wake up. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through 1 John. We're going to talk about it. I got 3 truths that I'm going to share, just 3 things that I take out of this passage I think are important for you guys. And then we're going to walk through some application things, some things that you can take away and actually put in place with your family about how to better serve the people that you call family. And so at the end, we're going to do something really fun. Don't worry, it'll be okay. So 1 John chapter 4, verse 9, this is a passage where John is talking about love. He's talking about the connection between God and love and us and how all that works together. And so, we're just going to start through it. We'll read through it. Starting in verse 9, it says, "In this the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent His only Son into the world, so that we might live through Him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and His love is perfected in us." And so, as I'm thinking about family and how all this mixes together, and what is the one commonality that no matter what family you were born into, whether it was great or whether it was horrible, what is the one thing that we all take from this? And where I came to was, it's impossible for us to really understand how to serve the family the way that God did and the way Jesus did and the way that He calls us to without first understanding true biblical love, without first understanding true biblical grace, and then inputting that into how you love your wife, how you serve your husband, how you respect your parents, how you love your children as they're growing. And so this is the passage that I came to because I really like how it ties in a lot of things. There's lots of passages in Scripture, especially in the New Testament, where the biblical writers would take a chapter or they take a passage and they would just present the gospel. There's one in Colossians that's very good. There's one in Philippians that's Megan's favorite. And this is kind of a mini version of that, where John is just saying, for if you didn't know, I'm just going to lay out the gospel for you. And what he says is he all connects it with love. And he says, in this the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world. And so as you're thinking through this, and as you're kind of walking through, how this works, I want us to kind of pull away a little bit, if we have ego, I'm sure y'all don't, but I do, put it at the door, and really just address this as if you're hearing it for the first time. Because especially, people that grow up in church, people that have been in church, people that are in our little Bible belt, a lot of times we skim over things that talk about the gospel, that talk about Jesus, that talk about things that we already know. But what you see in the New Testament, and you see especially in the Old Testament, is people reminded themselves constantly about God. They reminded themselves constantly about who God was and who Jesus was and what that was, because the gospel is what saves us. The gospel is what everything is centered around. And so when we think about this passage and we think about what this looks like, it looks like that there is this creator God, this creator of the universe, master over everything, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and completely just, that created you and me and all of us. And there was such love in that. We don't think about the fact that, God created us out of this deep sense of love. He cared about us more than anything else in creation. And not only did he just create us, but he set us apart to help rule over the rest of creation. That's what we were originally designed to do, is to help rule. But then we failed. We made a mistake. We sinned and brought sin into the world. And then what's crazy is God showed us this immense, incredible, deep, meaningful act of love, and we scorned it. We said, I would rather do my own thing. I would rather focus on myself. And it was this huge act of defiance and insult and unlove. But what's even more incredible is that God, because of his love for us, because of his immense grace and care for us, sent someone to save us. He came after us. Over and over in the Bible and over in your life, you can probably look and see where people have always run from God. People have always wanted to do their own thing. They've always thought that they knew better. But God, in his immense love and mercy, came after us. He sent someone who did not deserve to die for us. He sent someone to be made man, to be humbled to that of a servant, and to serve us unto the point of death. And that's what Jesus did. And he did it out of love. And it's this incredible story when you look at it, especially in 1 John, how he connects it all to, there was this deep, meaningful connection between us and God. And he wanted that connection. And even when we wanted nothing to do with him, even when we wanted to run away as far as possible, he kept that connection going. He bridged the gap so that we could be in eternal connection with him forever. That's what eternal means. I just repeated myself. Redundant. So, when we look at this, when we look at our families and we look at how do we best serve them and how we best serve the church and how we best serve our community, which is what we're looking at for the next 3 weeks, I do not believe that it is possible for us to do that well and to do that the way God has called us to if we do not first understand our relationship with God. And we don't look at it from the lens of love. If we don't wake up every day and say, I am here because God created me out of love, and I can have a relationship with him, the creator of the universe, because he sent his son to die for me out of love, and that immense feeling when it hits you of grace, of I don't deserve this, there's no way on earth I should have this connection, there's no way on earth that I should be here, but God saved me anyway. If we don't feel that, if we don't truly just feel that in our heart and in our bones, then it's never going to translate into dealing with family, dealing with parents, with siblings, with children, with everybody. It's not going to translate into moving outside of the home, into loving our church family well, and it's definitely not going to translate out of that into loving the community that God has placed us in. And so, that's where we're starting today. We're starting with love, because I believe that everything, especially when you talk about pouring yourself out, serving others, it starts with love. And so, if you're taking notes, I would encourage it. You can use it on your phone. You can write on the back of your program. Or if you just are photographic memory, just remember it. I've got 3 truths, 3 promises that this passage says for us. Number 1 is Jesus' act of service was the ultimate act of love. Jesus' act of service was the ultimate act of love. If you look in verse 10, it says, "In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that He has loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins." Propitiation just means that, like, He took our place. Bump, switch. So, what we have to understand, this is what I was just talking about, is that it all starts from what Jesus did. This whole thing is gospel-centered. Everything revolves around the fact that God made Himself man, lived among us, loved us while He was on earth, and then died for us so He could be raised, therefore saving us for eternity. And it's this incredible picture. And a lot of times we come in here week after week, day after day, and we don't think about it. We just glaze over. But when we take a few seconds and we really just sit and accept the fact that even though we didn't deserve it, even though we really did the opposite, and we ran from God, and we defied God, and we insulted God, He still made the ultimate sacrifice for us. I just love the fact that we can just kind of sit in that and just say, God, I feel that grace. I feel the undeserving. I feel the mercy that comes from that. I'm just kind of a feeler. If you don't feel that way, it's in there. It's true. Just rely on that. Jesus' act of service was the ultimate act of love. Number 2, loving the family well comes from loving God well. Loving the family well comes from loving God well. There's this triangle diagram that me and Megan got in marriage counseling, or premarital counseling. And it's this triangle where you and your spouse are right here and God's at the top of the triangle. And as you grow closer to God, you go closer to each other. I always like that. It's simple. It shapes. Like, for me, that makes sense. And it's the same thing here. When you look at verse 11, it says, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another." And there's this picture that comes from that of everything that we know, everything that we do comes from what God did for us. If it's gospel-centered, then as we grow closer to God, as we focus on loving God well, the outpouring of that, what comes as the overflow is loving others well. If I'm focused on loving God, I'm focused on reading this book, understanding who He is, spending time in prayer, and deepening that connection between me and God, which is a direct link. We don't have to go through anybody. If we deepen that, and we grow in that, and we love God well, then I believe that we can't help but do the things that we talk about. I believe that if you are so wholly focused on God, then out of that comes loving your immediate family well, loving your extended family well. I believe that when you come in here, if you are praising God, I feel like if you are loving Him well, then the overflow of that is this church grows deeper together. This church becomes a church family. It becomes a church body. And then I believe that out of the overflow of that, this community comes to know Ridgecrest as a people who love well. But I think to get to that point, it all starts with loving God well. So number 1, Jesus' act of service was the ultimate act of love. Number 2, loving the family well comes from loving God well. Number 3, God reveals Himself through the love of His people. And this was interesting to me. When you look at verse 12, it's the last verse of the passage. It says, "No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and His love is perfected in us." I'm a bit of a smart aleck, if you haven't noticed already. But it said in verse 12, "No one has ever seen God." And I'm like, yeah, duh, we know that. Thanks for the update. But when you look at this, it says that even though no one has ever seen God, no one has ever, God doesn't, I don't believe this. It's never happened to me. It may happen to you. God doesn't send us emails. He doesn't knock on the door and say, give you your mail. We don't see a physical God. But instead, we believe that God is this being, this spiritual ruler over the world, and he works through us. And so what this means is that, and you can probably look back, if you were a Christian, if you came to faith, you probably know this, you know God through other people. And what this means is you probably came to faith because some people interacted with you, more or less, maybe not. For me, in ninth grade, it was a guy named Bob who was my Sunday school leader, who taught a Sunday school lesson on there's a hole in your soul, and the only thing that can fill it is Jesus. And you're like, man, that is the quintessential Sunday school sermon. And it was great. But that started a process of a year-long learning for me that ended up leading me to Disciple Now. A friend invited me, 10th grade, and I trusted in the Lord. And Bob was integral to that. My friend who invited me to church was integral in that. The church who put on the D Now was integral in that. And I found Jesus, and I trusted my life to God through those people. I saw God through them. And so for your family, they will see God through you. God will be made manifest through how you love them. And so verse 12 for me is huge, because if we're focused on loving God well, and we're focused on knowing God, serving others, and reaching our world, that's our vision, by the way. If you want to write that down, it's a good one. Then the whole purpose is, how do we introduce people to Jesus? How do we introduce our family members, our church body, our community? How do we introduce them to God and put them on a path that leads them to eternity with Him? And according to verse 12, if you believe the Bible is real and true, then this says that they will be introduced to Jesus through how well we love other people. And that was huge for me, because God is made visible, made manifest through how we treat others, how we love well, how we interact with people in our daily lives. And so I love this passage. I love how John connects everything to love, because everything is connected to love. This is a deep, personal relationship. This is not some far-off judge that we serve out of spite or out of being forced into. This is a loving Father who came after us, rescued us, adopted us into His family. And because of that great love and that great act, we now love others like He loved us. There's this book that I was reading. It's by Jack Balswick. He had this quote in there, and it says, "And as we have received that unconditional love represented in the unity of the Godhead, we offer that unconditional love to others." That was long. Basically what it's saying is, because of what God did for us, we take that, we receive that grace and that love, and we show that grace to others. And I love that picture. And so, if you're hearing this and you're like, that is awesome, Logan, good passage, love it. This is not helping me at all love my family, because I've got to leave here and I have a horrible relationship with my any family member here. We've all got one that we struggle with. How do I love them better? How do I serve them? What am I supposed to take from this? And so I hear you. I listened. I've got 4 things that I think a grace-filled family looks like. And these are things that they don't really come from the passage, but what I believe they come from is when I look at the life of Jesus, if Jesus' life and His act of service was the ultimate act of love, and if we're supposed to know God well and love Him well, and if we're supposed to follow Him and emulate Him, then these are some things that when I look at Jesus, these are what I see. And so when I think about how do we serve our family well, no matter what the family looks like, no matter what the family dynamic looks like, these are 4 things that I think translate very easily into all things. They translate easily. They're not always easy to put into practice. So the 4 things are: a grace-filled family bears burdens. By the way, you'll see as we go through, I'm very excited about these because they all have the same first letters, like bear burdens. It's going to be great. Just wait. Grace-filled families bear each other's burdens. When you look at Matthew 11, that's the passage that talks about where Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I believe that one of the ways that we can serve our families and the way that we can come alongside and show Jesus to the people that we live with every day is to bear those burdens. Each of us have things that we're dealing with. The way that I like to think about it is sometimes we have crushing weights. It's these giant, heavy things that come out of nowhere and they slam you into the dirt. And those are one type of burden. And then we have another type where it's just kind of like a weight vest. It's something that we carry every single day. But every single day, that weight bears on us more and more and more. And so for some of us, we've got people in our family who are being crushed by certain burdens today. And we also have some people who act like everything's okay, but every day they're carrying more and more weight on their backs. And I believe that if we live in a grace-filled family, we are called to help carry and bear those burdens. So, number one, grace-filled families bear burdens. Number two, grace-filled families are always available. And this is something that, I'm going to be honest, a lot of people struggle with, especially in my context as a youth pastor, watching this, and it can be an issue. And it's when a lot of times you'll have parents, you'll have siblings, you'll have family members who may be present, they may be there, but they're not available. And it may look like travel, it may look like work, it may look like I'm focused on other things. But I've watched a lot of families have to walk through the fact of so-and-so family member, even if they're here, they're not available. And when I look at Jesus and I look at his life, especially when he walked and taught and dealt with his disciples, he was always there. He was always available to teach and to preach and to pray for and to lift up and to encourage and to guide. All those things can't happen if you're not available. And so I believe that grace-filled families are always available. Number three, grace-filled families selflessly serve. And you're like, obviously, Logan, the title is called Serve the Family. Obviously, we should serve. And what I look at this is not the serve part, but it's the selfless part. Because when I look at what Jesus did and I looked at his ultimate act, it was an act of selflessness. It was, I'm going to put what I want on the side right now because my family needs this. I'm going to put away what I think needs to happen and what I feel like I should deserve. Instead, I'm just going to love my family well. Because Jesus, his whole earthly ministry was just about that. It was about serving selflessly. So, grace-filled families bear burdens. They're always available. They selflessly serve, and they passionately pray. You see what I did there? The letters? I love it. It was great. As I've been walking through ministry, and as I've been studying the Bible, and as I've been trying to learn about, how do we love people well? And I think about, as a minister, like, my job is literally just to serve and love people. And I've always wondered, what's the best thing that we can do? And a lot of this falls in the same thing as families. We can serve others. We can be there with them. We're always available when the congregation or when people need us. We help bear burdens when we can. And I think those are all powerful things that the Spirit gives us the opportunity to do, not just ministers, but the body. If we are a believer, we are called to do that. What I've come to find, and I've said this a lot, is that the most powerful weapon that we have as believers is the ability to pray for others. And I feel like it's the most powerful and it's also the most misunderstood. But when you go back and you think about what prayer is this direct connection between us and God. Because we know that we're not powerful. We know that we mess up. We're not perfect. We actually mess things up constantly. But what we do have is we have this connection to the creator of the universe who is perfect in every way and is all-powerful. And not only is he all-powerful, but we have a relationship with him. And when we ask him things, he answers that all the time. And it's crazy when you think about the fact that if I would like for something to happen and I am desperately needing this, and I think, like, my family is struggling because of this, or I can't make it today because of this, these burdens that I'm carrying are too heavy, I can just ask the one who releases that burden. I can ask the one who gives us that yoke and gives us that rest, and he answers us. Like, that's incredible that we have a direct connection. We don't have to go through anybody else. We don't have to, like, write a memo and send it off and wait 3 to 5 days. Like, we have an instant connection. No matter when, no matter what we have to say, no matter what we ask, God answers. And so I believe one of those powerful things that you can do as a family member of your family, if you're trying to love them well and serve them and become a grace-filled family, the best thing that you can do is pray. And say, God, I need you to move in my family. I need this to happen. I need this to change, and I need you to be the center. And what's the beautiful part of that about that is God doesn't always answer how we want. He's not a weapon to be pointed and sent, but he knows best. And so he even works through your own insecurities, your own imperfections, your own self-esteem issues, your own past problems that insert itself into present situations. It's incredible. Like, God just says, if you will just talk to me and you will just be with me, I will handle it. Because I have a perfect plan and I know what needs to happen. It's incredible. I don't think we truly understand the power that we possess as believers of Christ who have the Holy Spirit sealed inside us as a guarantee of our salvation. I don't know if we ever will truly get the power that we have because we are connected to such a good, powerful, gracious God. It's wild. I think it's crazy. And so the way that we're going to wrap this up, if you were here a little bit before I got on the mic and very awkwardly said, hey, this is a sermon on family. Hopefully you can either A, sit with your actual family, or B, find a little group of your church family to sit with. I did that, and I think just about everybody, I don't see a lot of people just loners, which is good. What I want us to do is put some of this into practice. This is where you participate. It's going to be great. I'm excited about it. I feel like if I have time where I can basically ask and force you to do something, it would be to pray for each other. Because I just went through this whole spiel about how the most powerful, impactful thing that you can do is pray for your family. And so what I would like for us to do is look to your left, look to your right, see those people. If you don't know them, they're now a part of your family for the next 2 minutes. It's great. We're all one family of God, so if you don't know the names of your family members, you may want to ask real quick. What I would like for us to do is group up a little bit, and we're going to pray for each other. If there's something specific that you would like for the person next to you to pray for, tell them. Say hey, just real quick, I'm struggling with such and such. Today's going really well, but yesterday was awful. Even in the balcony, even on the back row, love it. Y'all are going to pray together. And what we're going to do is we are going to take a little bit of a step outside of our comfort zone, and we're going to pray aloud. There's nothing magical about this. There's nothing that, crazy happens, but I think it's powerful when the body of Christ, this family of believers, hears everybody connecting with God on a deep, intimate level. And so what you're going to do, hopefully, otherwise it's going to be real weird, is pray together for about 30 to 60 seconds, and then I will close this. As I close this, that's when everybody will come up and we'll move on through this. But hopefully this has been a little bit enlightening. Hopefully this has been a little bit giving you the tools that you need to leave here and just make it a little bit better. And if you haven't really listened or anything, the one thing I can tell you is if you will just focus on loving God well, the rest will fall into place. Love Him, deepen your relationship with Him, deepen that instant, direct connection that you have to the ultimate God of the universe, and everything else will begin to fall into place. So link up with your families, the people around you, your church family. Ask real quick if they need anything specific to pray for. I'll keep talking just so that it's not super quiet and weird. Then we will move into a time of prayer. Just remember that prayers do not have to be long. They do not have to be eloquent. You are just having a conversation. It can be very short. It can be very sweet. Or you can kind of go nuts with it. As you are talking and as you are figuring out what to pray for, just move into that. And then in a few minutes, in a few seconds, I'll close this out. God, we love you. We thank you for just what you've done for us, for the immense act of grace and of love that we get to experience every day just by living this life with you. And I thank you that you have designed us to be a part of a family, that you have put people in our lives to be with day in and day out, through good times, through bad times, through hills and valleys. God, I thank you for each and every person that we get to call family, whether that is traditional, nuclear, extended, or a part of this church family. And I pray that we learn and we know how to serve them well, how to love them well, so that they can see you through how we interact with them. And God, I pray for this church. I pray for this family of believers, that we don't just see each other as fellow spectators or neighbors, but instead we see each other as brothers and sisters that we get to love well and serve well and do life with. And so I pray that as we move into a time of invitation, that if we feel your Spirit moving, that we answer that we are hypersensitive to the workings of your Spirit. I pray that as we leave here, we don't just try to impact our families, but move through that, overflow that into our church and into our communities, God. And I pray, above all else, as we leave here, that we have courage to live for you, that we have the boldness to live out our faith in a world that wants nothing to do with us. And I pray that we have the faith to make that all possible. So in your name we pray. Amen.